welcome to Mind Patterns channel. You ever feel like you're arguing with your own brain? You know, like there's a little voice in there that's just a bit too critical, a bit too loud, especially when you're just trying to fall asleep. Well, if you do, you are not alone. It turns out that's an incredibly common human experience. Today, we're going to dive into the science of why our brains do this, and way more importantly, what we can actually do about it. So let's explore this tricky brain of ours and see if we can learn to work with it instead of against it. So, let's just start with a really direct question for you. Is your mind a friend or is it a critic? I think for a lot of us, it can really feel like a harsh critic, right? Constantly pointing out our flaws, replaying our mistakes on a loop. It's that voice that keeps us up at night, spinning these little worries into absolute catastrophes. And that brings us to our first big idea. Having this inner critic isn't some kind of personal failing on your part. Nope, it's actually a feature of our tricky brains, which, you gotta remember, are wired for survival, not necessarily for happiness. This inner critic is just a standard part of the human package. We've all got one. So does this sound familiar? You make one small mistake at work, maybe you miss a deadline by an hour, and your brain immediately jumps to this huge global judgment. I'm a failure. It doesn't just focus on the action, it attacks your entire identity. Or what about this one? You say something a little awkward in a meeting, and for the rest of the day, you are just convinced that everyone is judging you, that they're all thinking you're an idiot. We jump to these really negative conclusions about what other people are thinking, with absolutely zero evidence to back it up. Now here's what's really interesting about all this. These things aren't just random passing bad moods. They are distinct, repeatable patterns of thought. And you know what? That's actually really good news, because once you can start to see the pattern, you can start to change it. And these patterns, they have a name in psychology. They're called cognitive distortions. And honestly, the most powerful first step to quieting that inner critic is simply learning how to spot them, how to identify them as they're happening in real time. So what exactly are they? Well, cognitive distortions are basically automatic, kind of biased ways of thinking that make us see things way more negatively than they really are. They're like mental shortcuts our brain takes, especially when we're stressed. And I really want to repeat that last part because it's so important. They are automatic and they are not our faults. All right, let's look at one of the most common ones. All or nothing thinking. This is the perfectionist's trap. I mean, life is rarely black or white, right? It's full of gray areas. But this distortion forces our experiences into one of two extreme boxes. Either it was perfect, or it was a complete and utter disaster. There's just no room for anything in between. Just look at this example. The distorted thought takes one piece of evidence, a single C-, and uses it to predict this massive, catastrophic future. But the balanced thought, it contains the damage. It says, okay, I'm disappointed with this C-, but it doesn't let that one grade define your entire academic future. Okay, and building on that, let's look at the next one, overgeneralization. This is when we take one negative thing that happened and we turn it into a rule for our entire life. If you ever hear yourself using words like always or never, ding ding ding, that is a huge red flag for this one. Here's a perfect example. One awkward first day at a new job becomes this never-ending pattern of defeat. The balanced thought, though, it challenges that. It normalizes it. It says, hey, first days are tough, that's normal. It frames it as a learning process, not a final verdict on your entire career. Okay, so we're identifying these patterns, but a lot of us know that they have this really nasty habit of getting much, much louder just as our head hits the pillow. Why is that? Why does our brain choose the dead of night to host its own little festival of worries? Well, the answer actually lies in our brain chemistry. You see, as we transition towards sleep, the balance of power in our brain starts to shift, pretty dramatically actually, and it leaves our worries completely unchecked. This is a great way to think about it. During the day, your prefrontal cortex, that's the front part of your brain, it acts like a calm, rational manager. It looks at problems and says, hey, let's keep this in perspective. But as you get ready for sleep, that manager starts to clock out for the day, and with the manager gone, your emotional alarm system, the amygdala, is left in charge, and its job is to sound the alarm at the tiniest hint of trouble. So what can we do about all this? The good news is, we aren't helpless, not at all. We can build a mental toolkit with specific strategies for both the day and for the night. So let's start with what you can do when the sun is still up. Now, this is a crucial insight. Trying to just stop a negative thought is like trying not to think of a pink elephant. It's impossible, it doesn't work. Instead, the goal is to catch the thought, examine it, and then actively rewrite it into something more balanced and, well, true. This is a core technique of what's called cognitive behavioral therapy. And this breaks it down into a really simple 3-step process you can use anytime. First, just notice the thought and give it a name. That's all or nothing thinking again. Second, challenge it. Ask for evidence. And that question, what would I tell a friend? Man, that is so powerful, because we're often so much kinder and more rational with our friends than we are with ourselves. And finally, step 3, reframe it into a statement that's just more realistic. Okay, but what about when you're actually lying in bed and your brain's alarm system is going wild? For that, we have a different, really fascinating tool that's designed specifically to quiet a racing mind at night. It's called cognitive shuffling. The goal here isn't to solve your worries. It's to gently guide your brain away from them. It's really about giving your mind a harmless, kind of boring task to do so it doesn't have the mental space to spin all those anxious stories. And here's exactly how you do it. You pick a simple, emotionally neutral word, let's say, night. Then you go letter by letter. For N, think of words, nose. Picture a nose for a second. Nut. Picture a nut. The absolute key here is to visualize each thing briefly, but not to link them into a narrative. No stories. This randomness is what makes it work. You just keep going until, well, eventually, you don't. You're asleep. And this is why it's so effective. It's actually brilliant. First, it actively displaces worry by basically hogging all your brain's processing power. Second, it cleverly mimics the non-linear, kind of bizarre way our thoughts naturally behave right before we fall asleep. It's basically nudging our brain into its pre-sleep state. And third, it keeps things neutral, avoiding those emotional triggers that keep you wide awake. Which brings us to what might be the most empowering idea of all. All of these tools, identifying distortions, shuffling your thoughts, they all point to one profound, game-changing shift in perspective. I really want you to let this one sink in. The goal is not a war against your thoughts. You can't win that war. The goal is to become an observer, a watcher of your own mind. To see a thought like, I'm a failure, just float by and be able to say, there's that thought again, without having to grab onto it and believe that it's the absolute truth. So I'll leave you with this question to carry with you. As you go through your day, and especially as you lie down to sleep tonight, start to just notice your thoughts and ask yourself with some genuine curiosity, which of these are actually true and which are just old distorted stories my tricky brain likes to tell. You might just be surprised by the answer. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more.